Near the shores of New Hampshire, USA, the submarine Squalus cruised steadily across the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. The date was May 23, 1939, at precisely 8:40 a.m. Gleaming and brand new, Squalus was undergoing a series of sea trials before officially joining the U.S. Navy's fleet. Gliding through the restless waves, Lieutenant Oliver Naquin, the submarine's 35-year-old captain, stood atop the conning tower, braced against the wind and spray. The vessel had already completed 19 successful test dives, but the next maneuver promised to push both the ship and its 56 crew members to their absolute limits. The Squalus was preparing for a simulated crash dive, a critical emergency tactic where a submarine, threatened on the surface, plunges beneath the waves with maximum speed. Naquin called down to the radio operator, instructing him to send their coordinates back to the submarine's base in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. After ensuring everything was in order, Naquin savored one last breath of the briny ocean air before pressing the button on the bridge that triggered the unmistakable blare of the crash dive alarm. As the sharp blare of the klaxon echoed through the confined passages of the submarine, Naquin swiftly descended into the control room, ensuring the upper and lower tower hatches were securely sealed as he went. Inside the control room, crew members stood ready at their posts, focused intently on the complex sequence of actions required to guide the submarine smoothly beneath the waves. Naquin issued a series of precise, practiced orders.
Close all vents. Prepare the submarine for diving. Flood main ballast tanks 1 and 2. Open valves for bow buoyancy tanks. Stand by for main tanks 3 through 7.
The operation unfolded flawlessly. Beside Naquin stood Lieutenant Walter Doyle, his chief officer, intently monitoring the indicator panel nicknamed the Christmas tree. One by one, the lights shifted from red to green, confirming that all exterior vents and hatches were tightly sealed against the encroaching sea. Naquin exchanged a brief, confident glance with Doyle as the ballast tanks filled rapidly, pulling the Squalus underwater to a depth of 50 feet. On the surface, within moments of the alarm, the ocean lay undisturbed, the submarine vanishing as though it had never been there. Settling at the target depth, Naquin and Doyle shared a moment of satisfaction over the seamless dive. Then, a sudden, unsettling sensation in Naquin's ears made him freeze. He instantly knew something was gravely wrong. Before he could act, a panicked sailor turned from the intercom.
The engine room is flooding.
Reacting immediately, Naquin ordered an emergency ascent. Pressurized air roared into the ballast tanks as the submarine began to rise. The bow breached the surface briefly, but the stern, weighed down by the torrent of water pouring into the rear compartments, dragged the vessel back under. Within moments, the Squalus was overwhelmed, disappearing into the depths of the sea. The interior of the Squalus was chaos. In the strobing light of flickering bulbs, loose tools, fittings, and even torpedoes dislodged by the submarine's steep descent careened through the narrow compartments. Sailors who hadn't secured themselves were thrown across the tilting ship, colliding with bulkheads and being hurled into whatever obstacles lay in their path. In the rapidly flooding aft section, drenched crew members fought to escape the encroaching seawater before heavy, steel, watertight doors slammed shut to stem the flow. Water surged relentlessly through the submarine's interconnected piping system, spewing from burst valves and fractured lines and jets that sprayed over men and machinery from bow to stern. Crew members scrambled frantically, trying to seal off air and communication pipes, their efforts increasingly desperate as the submarine plunged deeper into the Atlantic. Every man, from Captain Naquin to the lowest-ranking sailor, could only hope that when their vessel reached the ocean floor, it wouldn't rupture like an overpressured balloon. As the Squalus continued its fateful descent, a new and equally dire crisis unfolded. In the forward battery room, the massive batteries that powered the submarine while submerged were on the verge of exploding. Arcing white-hot electricity and bursts of acrid blue flames filled the compartment, threatening to destroy the ship before it hit the bottom. With remarkable bravery, Chief Electrician Lawrence Gaynor thrust his hand into the heart of the malfunctioning system and disconnected the power supply, averting disaster. But in doing so, he plunged the submarine into total darkness. In the pitch-black confines of the crippled vessel, the chaos momentarily subsided. The submarine, its contents settling, drifted downward in eerie silence. Each sailor, isolated in his own blackened world, braced for the inevitable impact. After 4 agonizing minutes, the Squalus struck the seabed with a bone-jarring thud. The hull, though battered, held firm. Flashlights were quickly distributed, their narrow beams piercing the inky darkness as Naquin and Doyle began assessing the situation. It became evident that water had poured into the engine room through an air vent that should have been sealed. The Christmas tree panel had falsely indicated that all vents were secure, pointing to a catastrophic failure in both the vent mechanism and the indicator system. As the captain and his chief officer worked to piece together what had gone wrong, Charles Cuny manned the intercom, attempting to reach every section of the submarine. His calls to the aft compartments were met with chilling silence. Slowly, the grim reality emerged. The rear sections of the submarine, including the aft battery room and both engine rooms, were completely flooded. The 26 men stationed there were likely lost. In the forward compartments, 33 sailors, battered and bleeding but alive, gathered under the dim flashlight beams. Despite the dire situation, Naquin allowed himself a small glimmer of hope. Things could be worse, he thought grimly. But his optimism was clouded by the harsh reality displayed on the depth gauge. The submarine lay 73 meters, 240 feet below the surface. No crew had ever been rescued from such depths. Refusing to dwell on the odds, Naquin directed the crew to deploy emergency flares, which ascended to the surface and ignited, signaling their position. A marker buoy equipped with a telephone line was also released, bearing a sign that read, "Submarine sunk here. Telephone inside." If neither the flares nor the buoy were noticed, Naval Command would still be alerted when the Squalus missed her scheduled check-in at 9:40 a.m. The crew's most pressing challenge now was the air supply. Every breath they exhaled added to the accumulation of carbon dioxide, a silent and deadly threat. With oxygen dwindling and the danger of asphyxiation growing, the men could only wait and pray that help would arrive in time. The batteries on the Squalus posed yet another deadly threat. If seawater mixed with the chemicals inside them, it could generate lethal chlorine gas. Meanwhile, the water level inside the hull continued to rise, inching ever closer to the battery compartments. To conserve oxygen, Naquin instructed his men to remain as motionless and silent as possible, with no unnecessary movement or conversation. Soda lime, a powder that absorbs carbon dioxide, was sprinkled around the interior. The crew was also issued Momsen lungs, rudimentary aqua lungs resembling rubber hot water bottles attached to breathing masks. These devices were designed to allow sailors to escape a sunken submarine and swim to the surface. though at the Squalus's current depth, they were unlikely to be effective. Nevertheless, the lungs provided small bursts of fresh air, offering temporary relief from the increasingly foul atmosphere. Under the dim emergency lighting, the surviving crew huddled in corners, their breaths shallow as they waited for rescue. At the Portsmouth base, the Squalus's failure to check in had raised alarm, and a large-scale rescue effort was launched. By 1 p.m., expert divers, including Charles Swede Mommsen, creator of the Mommsen lung, were on their way from Washington via seaplane. The Sculpin, sister ship to the Squalus, along with several tugboats, raced to the submarine's last reported location. From New London, Connecticut, the Navy rescue vessel Falcon, equipped with the experimental McCann Rescue Chamber, set sail to join the operation. On board the Squalus, canned fruit was distributed at noon to boost the crew's spirits and provide some energy in the cold. Shortly afterward, the dull thrum of propeller blades reached their ears. The Sculpin had arrived and quickly located the marker buoy the submarine had launched earlier. Using the buoy's telephone link, the Sculpin's captain made contact with Naquin, who relayed the Squalus's depth and location. However, the fragile line snapped mid-conversation, cutting off communication. By 7:30 p.m., after 4 hours of effort, the tug Pennacook successfully snagged an anchor onto the submarine's deck, re-establishing contact. Inside the Squalus, the temperature had plummeted to a near-freezing 39 degrees Fahrenheit, condensation dripping from every surface. The crew was chilled to the bone, and Naquin ordered blankets to be distributed alongside a meal of beans, tomatoes, and fruit. Fatigue and stale air left many men drowsy, and some managed to drift into a fitful sleep. Their uneasy rest was interrupted by a piercing sound. An oscillator aboard the tug Wandang, designed to transmit Morse code, began sending high-pitched tones through the water. Naquin sent 2 sailors to the conning tower with a sledgehammer to reply by tapping out messages on the thin metal cover. Slowly and deliberately, they reported that 33 crew members were still alive, though 26 had been lost. At 4:20 a.m., the Falcon finally arrived with its McCann Rescue Chamber. Its inventor, Alan McCann, was on board, eager to see how the device would perform at such a depth. Mommsen, now overseeing the rescue, debated whether to attempt pumping water out of the flooded compartments to raise the submarine or have the crew use their Mommsen lungs to escape. However, the Squalus's sinking was still unexplained, and these options were deemed too risky. The McCann Rescue Chamber, though untested in real emergencies, seemed the best hope. By 9:30 a.m., the Falcon anchored directly above the Squalus, and a diver descended to attach a guide cable to the submarine's escape hatch. Inside the hull, the crew cheered faintly when they heard the diver's footsteps on the deck. With the guide cable in place, the McCann Rescue Chamber was readied for its maiden mission. Mommsen selected his 2 most skilled divers to accompany the chamber as it was carefully lowered into the water. The tense wait was over. The rescue was finally beginning. The rescue chamber's descent took a tense 15 minutes. When it finally reached the Squalus and was secured to the escape hatch with heavy steel bolts, the divers inside could feel the anxious anticipation below. A sailor inside the submarine quickly began to turn the wheel sealing the hatch, and when it opened, a gust of freezing, putrid air rushed into the chamber. The divers peered down into a dimly lit, cramped space where pale, exhausted faces stared silently back at them. Expecting cheers of relief, they were stunned by the subdued reception. Perhaps the survivors didn't yet grasp that the chamber's arrival marked their salvation. Or maybe they knew that danger still loomed before they could reach safety. Without hesitation, the divers handed down supplies, soup, coffee, and sandwiches, and began pumping fresh air into the submarine. The surge of oxygen was a welcome reprieve, reviving spirits and clearing the foul, suffocating atmosphere. After an hour, the first group of 7 men climbed into the chamber. Their ascent was slow but steady, and when the chamber broke the surface, it was greeted with cheers aboard the Falcon. Mommsen and McCann were overjoyed. Their experimental device had worked flawlessly. Preparations were immediately made for another dive to rescue the remaining men. Below, however, new dangers emerged. Seawater had seeped into the submarine's battery compartments, causing a reaction that released toxic chlorine gas. McCann acted swiftly, leading his crew into the forward torpedo room and sealing the bulkhead to contain the spreading fumes. The survivors now found themselves crammed into an even smaller space, waiting in tense silence. Despite everything, McCann reflected with pride on his crew's discipline and bravery. None had panicked, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Meanwhile, on the surface, the chamber's second descent was delayed when the guide cable jammed. It had to be reeled back up, repaired, and sent down again. This time, 9 more men were successfully brought to safety. Another dive rescued an additional group, leaving only 8 men aboard the Squalus, including McCann and Doyle. By the time the chamber was ready for its final trip, night had fallen, and searchlights illuminated the scene as it descended. Docking went smoothly, and the last survivors climbed aboard. They allowed themselves a flicker of hope. Perhaps, after all, they would escape this nightmare. However, halfway through the ascent, disaster struck. The cable pulling the chamber jammed once more, leaving it suspended mid-water. The divers inside hit and kicked the chamber's motor in frustration, but it refused to budge. The chamber had to descend again to the Squalus, and a diver was sent to free the jammed cable. The 10 men in the chamber waited, tense but resigned. At least they had air, light, and radio contact with the surface, but doubts lingered. Would they ever escape, or would they be trapped like their fallen shipmates? Eventually, a tapping on the chamber's hull signaled that a diver had arrived. He managed to free the reel, and the chamber began its slow climb once more, inching toward safety at just 5 feet per minute. Then, another ominous problem arose. On the Falcon, crew members noticed that the guide cable was fraying, its strands snapping and unraveling under the strain. Fearing it might break entirely, Mommsen ordered the chamber to descend again, back to the ocean floor. The men inside were devastated. Once more, they endured the agonizing wait as the chamber reached the submarine. McCann stared down at the hatch, haunted by visions of his dead crewmates floating below, beckoning him to join them. Above, the rescue team worked frantically. A new cable needed to be attached, but divers of the era faced immense challenges. Encased in heavy, cumbersome suits, they could stay underwater for only a few minutes and required immense physical strength. The first diver tasked with attaching the cable became exhausted and had to be hauled back up. A second diver descended but also failed, the icy depths sapping his energy. Each failed attempt heightened the stakes, and time seemed to stretch endlessly as the men waited for their final chance at survival. The final stage of the Squalus rescue was fraught with tension and fatigue. Nighttime underwater operations were treacherous, and Mommsen was forced to make a difficult decision: to haul the chamber up with its dangerously frayed cable. Fearing that the steam pulley might snap the weakened cable, Mommsen and McCann opted for a painstaking alternative. A team of men aboard the Falcon, already exhausted and battling a freezing wind, began pulling the chamber up by hand. The process was grueling, with the cable hauled and relaxed rhythmically with the rise and fall of the ocean swell. After 10 nerve-wracking minutes, the most damaged section of the cable appeared above the waterline, revealing strands as thin as thread. Sweating despite the cold, Mommsen ordered a clamp to be attached below the frayed section. This secondary measure would ensure the chamber's safety if the main cable gave way. With this critical step complete, the men aboard the Falcon felt a collective surge of relief. They had secured the chamber and its precious cargo. At 12:38 a.m., the chamber was winched aboard. The last 8 survivors of the Squalus, including Lieutenant Naquin, emerged onto the deck. They were greeted by the freezing night air and sea spray, which had never felt so invigorating. After 40 harrowing hours trapped beneath the ocean, they were finally safe. 6 months later, the Squalus was salvaged in a groundbreaking operation. Air was pumped into its compartments, and the submarine was raised to the surface with such force that its bow shot 30 feet out of the water. When shown a photo of the event, President Franklin Roosevelt quipped that it resembled a sailfish leaping from the sea. True to naval tradition, the salvaged submarine was renamed Sailfish. Remarkably, the Sailfish was repaired and returned to service, with much of its structure intact despite the flooding. 4 members of its original crew served aboard it during World War II, where it fought against the Japanese in the Pacific. The Sailfish survived the war and was later dismantled for scrap. However, parts of the submarine, including the bridge and conning tower, were preserved as a memorial in Portsmouth Harbor to honor those lost in submarine service. This memorial remains a poignant reminder of their sacrifice. The Sculpin, which played a vital role in the rescue, met a tragic end during the war. In November 1943, it was sunk by Japanese naval forces. 21 of its crew were taken prisoner and placed aboard the Japanese aircraft carrier Chuyo. Ironically, the Chuyo was sunk a month later by the Sailfish, leaving only 1 member of the Sculpin's crew alive. The intertwined fates of the Squalus, Sailfish, and Sculpin remain a testament to both the courage and the tragic losses experienced during wartime and in naval service. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more incredible tales from history. What do you think? Could you have endured the 40-hour ordeal the crew of the Squalus faced? And what part of this story surprised or inspired you the most? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.